I have to say that in all my 12 years of experience with the Tibetans, many of whom I met, who testified to what they had gone through, I hadn't actually come across anything that had prepared me for what Israel has been doing and is doing in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank.
They are using our properties. They are sitting on our table inside our land. They are acting like they are the owners of the land.
Well, welcome to this Aletheia Dialogue with another witness bearer. A month ago, I featured an Aletheia Dialogue with Kevin Bloom, who's a Daily Maverick journalist and writer, and he told us his life story and how his vocation as one for whom truth really matters had changed him, and how he had moved from once serving as a volunteer as a 19-year-old with the Israeli Defense Force in the early 90s, with a deep passion for the Zionist cause, but then became a journalist, went on in life into becoming now a defender of the human rights of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, who are suffering terrible persecution from the state of Israel as it is present under Benjamin Netanyahu. If you don't have time to watch the whole interview, just read the articles on the Daily Maverick website, which I'll give a link to now, which actually are such an incredible three-part installment on the journey of consciousness of a person who really does care about where we're going in the world. Now, I didn't explain in the last interview why I use this term Aletheia Dialogue, so let me just very briefly give that introduction without becoming too philosophical. I take it, the word Aletheia, from Martin Heidegger's use of it, in which he has written a doctrine of truth as a commentary on Plato's allegory of the cave.
Imagine prisoners that have spent their entire lives chained deep inside a cave. They have been chained so that they cannot see behind themselves, and they are forced to stare endlessly at the cave wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire is burning, and between the prisoners and the fire is a raised walkway. Now imagine that each day, a menagerie of objects crosses the walkway. Animals, and people carrying their wares to market. Their shapes create an intricate shadow play on the wall in front of the prisoners. This is the only world that the prisoners have ever known. The shadows and the echoes of unseen objects. Now, imagine that a prisoner is released. After some time adjusting to the blinding light, the freed prisoner will begin to experience the world outside of the cave for the very first time. And it is like nothing he could have ever imagined. With his new perception of the world, the man will of course want to return to his friends to share his incredible discoveries. But the prisoners cannot recognize their old friend. He appears as all things do. His voice is a distorted echo, and his body is a grotesque shadow. They cannot understand his fantastic stories of the world outside of the cave. To them, it will never exist. This, of course, does not make the world outside of the cave any less real.
I use it because what has happened in that process of emergence from the darkness of the cave and what I saw happening in Kevin's life is very much somebody who had a certain representation of reality that he had been brought up with as a young Jew in Johannesburg and came to a whole new perspective. Now on Sunday, another good friend of mine, Donovan Roebert, also a deep thinker, a writer and author, very much as I see in the same trajectory as Kevin, to seek truth stroke reality as an emancipatory force, called me to ask if I could interview a young Christian Palestinian woman, Alice Kisiya, whom he had befriended, so I could hear her story of persecution, echoing much of what Kevin had spoken about. Now, Donovan hadn't even seen the interview with Kevin at that stage. Donovan has now seen that, and I hope that people will see in these two episodes a seamless continuity of the deeper theme of bringing us to a deeper awareness. Now, just to say, Donovan comes from a background from being a passionate advocate of the rights of the Tibetan people, which China has been trampling upon for decades. So he isn't a Johnny-come-lately to these sorts of asymmetrical conflicts between indigenous people and mighty powers. But first, let's just hear Alice in her own words explaining what's been going on, and this Instagram upload introduces her and her story.
My name is Alice. I'm from Bejala, Wadi al-Makhrur. Wadi al-Makhrur, it's known as agricultural area, and it's a UNESCO heritage site. Had a demolition more than one time for the house and the restaurant, actually for more than 20 times. And each time we rebuilt. There were no any problems about the ownership of the land. In 2017, Himinotta, which is the daughter of the GNF, claimed that this is their land. So we went to the court, and then at the court, we finished in 2023. They didn't prove that this is their land, and we have documents from 2014 from the civil administration that this is our land registration that my father inherited from the person who owns the land, and still the name, and still the land on his name for now, until now. On 31st of July, the settlers came with the protection of the army and the police, and they started to take out our things. I called the police and they arrested my brother. So they were really racist towards us. We are Palestinian with an Israeli and French citizenship, and we have rights exactly like they have, but the army take a side for the settlers, and they decided to protect them with their illegal eviction for me and my family. We've been since going back and forth with the family and activists from many peace associations to non-violent resistant protests to get back our land. So we decided to build a solidarity camp so we can invite more people, more press, more journalists to make them come here and see the case and see what's happening to Al-Makhrur, because it's been threatened by the settlers and the GNF, which will take the whole area and include it to the Batir new settlement. And then after the settlers came, the army, after 8 hours, declared our land as a military closed zone. The military order, it's for another place. It's for Wadi Haletz, the new settlement where Smotrich established. They include Al-Makhrur as its Wadi Haletz, which is not officially approved from the civil administration until now. And they were stealing while the war on Gaza and all eyes on Gaza, and they are taking advantage of the situation so they can steal more lands. They separate the West Bank and close on people living there, and they give the settlers the freedom of moving, the freedom of living, and the Palestinians are helpless. So me and my family and the activists, we are here to prove that we have the right to be here and to prove our existence in this area. So the settlers won't extend more and more, and to get back, of course, our land. We have the official papers, and it was recognized from the court. So they used this military order to make us to go to court. So when the army move from the court, the Hemenota can enter and just change the decision. And this is the thing that we don't want to do, because they can play easily with the decision. So we will go back. The military order will be finished soon. So we are waiting until the 1st, 2nd of September, and we will go back. Yes. People can support by being here, by being with us in the solidarity, sharing and talking about the story. And because this is not only a story about land, it's about a whole area, which is the last green area for almost in West Bank. We are not talking about one land. We are talking about a really big mountain, which is agricultural and historical, refers to the ancient time of Romans.
But while I was setting about creating a WhatsApp group with Donovan and Alice, I got another frantic call from Donovan on Sunday to tell me that Alice and her mother had been arrested. Now, fortunately, she has had support from local Israeli human rights activists and has lawyers to represent her. And I've learned this morning that she has now been released. Could potentially have been available to carry on with that interview. But much as I was looking forward to talking to her, Donovan thought it best to give her some time and not put her under even more pressure, and let us do what we can with this upload, where he can talk about his experience and how hopefully mercy and justice might still embrace in this thing. Now, Donovan, I'm really extremely grateful that Alice has been released, but just bring us up to date for this, and maybe just tell us also a little bit about how you got into this.
Sure, John. As you mentioned, I was involved with the Tibetan cause for 12 years. I was director of the Friends of Tibet. And I attended international conferences. I became a friend of the Tibetan Prime Minister in exile, Samdung Rinpoche. I spent 3 weeks at his house. I met numerous Tibetans who had suffered atrocious conditions, tortures, war crimes, imprisonments under the Chinese. And of course, it was a very stressful business to be, for 12 years, to be having to carry in myself what they were going through. And after 12 years, I was quite exhausted with it, really, and I handed it over to someone else. And then I gave up activism for some years. I am a Roman Catholic Christian. I needed time to do other things, and in the intervening years I've done that. But seeing now what has been happening in Gaza, as well as in the occupied West Bank, to see that darkness that has been going on for decades finally being brought to light in this way, has awoken in me again that knowledge of how terrible human beings can be to one another in situations where hatred and vengeance are the keynote.
The JNF, it's the Jewish National Fund that's funding the settlers and the settlements. These young settlers are coming from the orphans, from the welfares. The JNF are using these children in order to bring them and giving them shelter, and by putting them in lands that they don't belong to them. And they are using knives, weapons in order to take control of people's land and territories. Some settlers are 12 years, 13. Most of them are minors with knives. These settlers that the JNF hires to protect their land as they claim, which is not their land, to put them on the first line of the fire against the Palestinians. And when we talked to them, we understood that all of them mostly have a psychological problem with a really tough past they've been through.
I have to say that in all my 12 years of experience with the Tibetans, many of whom I met, who testified to what they had gone through, women and men, I hadn't actually come across anything that had prepared me for what Israel has been doing and is doing in Gaza. and in the occupied West Bank. And one of the things that struck me, during all this time, is the absence of any Christian input into the situation. We know that thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of Christians are, in a way, addicted to support for Israel as a kind of abstract entity, as something that flows from an indoctrinating teaching which teaches them that the Jews are the chosen people, which from my perspective as a Catholic Christian is a nonsense. It's a straight out nonsense, because any God who started on the basis that someone was chosen and someone else was not would not be a just God. So for me that's a nonsense. But I have actually seen pastors indoctrinating children as young as 6 and 7 years old with the exact words I'm quoting to you now: remember that Jews are better than us. So that puts us immediately in a very strange situation as Christians if we adopt that idea. And what it leads to is unqualified, unconditional support. Now, I have no problem with Christians supporting Israel. Obviously, the land of Israel has some significance for our Christian history, and I don't need to go into that because it's fairly obvious. I have no objection to Christians supporting Italy or supporting Germany. But the point is, when countries are doing evil under an evil regime, which the current Israeli administration is an evil, right-wing, quasi-fascist regime. Because when you're dealing with people like Itamar Ben-Gvir, and you're dealing with people like Bezalel Smotrich, who have openly voiced, this hatred, this contempt for the Palestinian people and what they intend to do, you realize, that what we're dealing with here is something dark. And Christians who are supporting unconditionally and in an unqualified manner this darkness that is currently present in the situation, the full situation as we've now openly experienced it for the last 11 months, are obviously completely on the wrong track, because what they're doing is they're supporting something that is unholy. Now, you were speaking in your opening introduction about Plato's cave, the well-known analogy of coming from ignorance to insight, to true insight. But that applies very much to us Christians in a spiritual way, in the sense that one of the things we are called to do is to bring that which is hidden in the darkness to the light. We're called to do that. We're called to do that in our personal lives. What is dark in ourselves, we have to expose to the light. That's part of our confessional, our worshipful service of Christ, is that we purify ourselves and that we recognize what is dark. So the Christian's true duty, I'm speaking about Western Christians now, and particularly I'm speaking about the Catholic Church, is that we should bring what is dark in that whole Israel-Palestine situation, we should bring it to the light. And we should examine it, and we should discern accordingly as to where our support should lie.
Tell me a bit more about Alice, because I'm mindful of that great Jesuit mystic and writer Anthony de Mello. He said, "It is common to oppose a truth, but impossible to resist a story." And when you sent me that Instagram message of Alice explaining how she and her family were being basically bullied off their restaurant, their land, their home by settlers, I just felt like I can't not respond to this. Tell us about how you got to know her. Tell us about her current situation.
Well, I first came across the situation that Alice Kisiya and her family have been going through, on Twitter. And I began to investigate it more fully, and I asked questions, and being a researcher, I was able eventually to locate her and to communicate with her. As you were saying, I invited her to be interviewed by you because that's what you do. And she was quite willing to tell her story for, I assumed in the first place, a South African audience, because we've been through this. We know what this is. We know exactly what this is. I wanted then for her story to be available to us. And so I made contact with her via Instagram, and I spoke to her several times, and she agreed to do the interview. But the story in brief is this. They're a Christian family in the Al-Makrour Valley, which is near Bethlehem. And they have some land there for decades. It's family land, and they had a home and a restaurant on the land. That was how they made their living. The Al-Makrour Valley is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's beautifully terraced. It's very desirable land. So they've been there for generations, and then the Israeli invader settlers began to occupy land adjacent, because what these so-called settlers, who are, by the way, illegally present by international law, they are illegally present in the Palestinian territories, yet they're Israeli state-backed. What they do is they begin to encroach, and then they place a settlement here and a settlement here, and then they want to create a contiguity so that they can continue to carve up the occupied West Bank into areas that increasingly confine the Palestinians and cut them off from having a kind of unified national, cultural, religious, and so on identity. In their drive to create this ever-expanding contiguous settlement zone, obviously Palestinian-owned land gets in the way. And the only way to deal with it, as they see it, is, you just get rid of them. You expel them. You find some way to get rid of them. The method of choice for them is just to harass them off the land. So they begin to bully them. They begin to intimidate them. In many cases, it's violent. I mean, a Palestinian was shot dead last night. Just last night, a 37-year-old Palestinian man was shot dead by a settler in Bethlehem, where actually Alice and her family are. I mean, Beit Jala is attached to Bethlehem. So they've been harassed for 20 years now. And during that 20 years, as you will have noted from Alice's own testimony, they've had their home and their restaurant demolished 20 times. So they basically keep on rebuilding, and then it gets broken down again by officials from the Israeli state. And then we have the settlers that harass the family all the time. And very recently, at the end of July, they actually broke down the gate to the property and forcefully entered the property, threw the Kisiya family off of the property, and sat themselves down at the Kisiya family's garden table, had a meal. According to Alice, some of them were reeking of vodka. So these are thugs. And since that time, Alice and her family have been living in a tent on land adjacent to their property, because they know that if they depart, if they go away, they'll never come back. They'll be kept out. So they are holding on, having survived on their land for 20 years long of harassment. They're still holding on with the help of some Israeli activists and other lawyers. I'm not sure exactly of all the details of who that support team is made up of, but they have some support. And then, of course, as you mentioned some days ago, when I wanted you to do that, asked you if you would be willing to do that interview with her, we were just setting up a WhatsApp group to discuss in a preliminary way how the interview would be conducted when Alice was arrested. I mean, I picked it up on Twitter within 5 minutes, and we had to shut that group down, for her protection. And she was then detained overnight for assaulting an IDF officer. I mean, that is absurd. And she was detained overnight. So that's part of the harassment, arrest you, let you go, intimidate you. Now she is back with her family in their campaign tent. And we don't know what the future holds for this family. As I say, they're a Christian family. they have a cross erected next to the tent where they are taking refuge outside of the gates of their own home so that they don't lose sight of what's happening on their land. And they are being supported by certain Christian ministers in the area as well. Among them the Dean of St. George's Chapel in Jerusalem, an Anglican minister, and also Munter Isaac, who is a Lutheran pastor from the area. He's quite well known worldwide, who visited her yesterday and put up a post to say that under the circumstances all is as well as can be, but for now, he says, for now she's been released, and the implication of that is that the harassment will continue. She will continue to resist peacefully, and at some point she'll probably be arrested again. So that's her story. But her story is illustrative of what happens throughout the occupied West Bank. One should bear in mind that there ought to be in Palestine today, in the Palestinian territories, there ought to be about 300,000 Christians. There ought to be, but there aren't, because 80% of them have been expelled from their lands and their homes. 80% of the Christian population of Palestine has been expelled from their land and are living in a diaspora around the world. So what we have left in Palestine today, I mean between the occupied West Bank and Gaza, are about 47,000 Christians. That is 20% of the number of Christians that ought to be there. And they make up 2% of the Palestinian population now, whereas previously they made up 10%. So they've been harassed and expelled over the decades, and the remnant are now in the same danger. Now, I don't want to make it seem like I'm only interested in standing up, or that I feel that Christians should only be interested in standing up for the rights of Christians in Palestine. By no means. I fully support my Muslim fellow human beings in Palestine who are suffering the same stuff, the same problems, the same harassment by the Israeli regime, and it's people on the ground, because its people on the ground are Israeli occupation force soldiers and the police, who are not there to protect the Palestinians when their land is invaded. They're in fact there to help the settlers to invade the land and to occupy the land. So in other words, they're doing exactly the opposite of what any law-abiding society would expect from their soldiers and their police.
But I think you're also wanting to drive home the fact that this is presented by the state of Israel. And I make a distinction from friends who said, talk about Israel and distinct from the state of Israel. Because Israel is a society. And society is primary before the state. And unfortunately, what seems to have happened is that the state has assumed a kind of a superior role to society, to think it can order society in according to a particular pattern, which is why we make these parallels between apartheid. Because that's what we're doing here. The state had decided this was going to be the order of things, and you made those references to, we know what's happened. I'm busy writing a story of Molly Blackburn in the 80s, and how she was doing very much what you're doing, Donovan. She was actually going out there to say, the relative privilege that she had, she was going to make darn sure that the government was not going to get away with it. So that's really what I see you doing. And they didn't get away with it. Ultimately, justice was eventually done. When Molly was killed, there were 20,000 black people came to her funeral. So it broke this convenient assumption that was made, as in South Africa, that it was a binary between black and white in the 80s, and now in Israel, a binary between Islam and Judaism. So I just wanted to give you that encouragement. Tell us more about what you've understood about the society of Israel that is showing through on this thing, because there are Jewish people, others who are supporting this case and challenging that sort of convenient binary assumption.
Let me, rather than put it in my own words, let me quote Gideon Levy, who is an ex-advisor to Shimon Peres, and a writer for the Haaretz newspaper in Israel. He has, in the past few months, since the atrocities in Gaza began, has made very clear that the vast majority of Israeli citizens living in Israel support Netanyahu. They support what is being done in the occupied West Bank. And
As did most whites in South Africa.
As did most in South Africa. So we shouldn't imagine that we're only dealing with a regime that is acting in a society that is, as for example in the Soviet Union, where really most of the people wanted to get rid of their governments. It's not the case. Israeli society to a large degree is entirely complicit in what is happening today, and this is again why I say Christians should not be supporting them now. Yes, at other times, but in this time Christians should not only not be supporting them, they should be actively standing up against what is going on there. That's their duty as servants of Jesus. That's their duty, to go against what is evil. But yes, John, there are minority groups. There is a human rights group in Israel that reports on the atrocities that are carried out in the Teiman prison system, where we have everything from all kinds of torture right down to rape going on behind this dark wall of hiddenness. And there are certainly a number of Israelis who oppose what is going on, just as there were a minority who opposed what was going on in South Africa at that time. But they are a minority, and they live their lives under threat mostly. I mean, I know about an Iraqi Jewish human rights attorney who was helping to stop the settlers from destroying the aid trucks that were going towards Gaza. They would just burn them out and throw the aid off the trucks and so on. She tried to prevent that, and she lives under constant death threat. Gideon Levy, who's a voice for truth, for exposing the truth about Israel, is often labeled as a traitor, and so they struggle. But this is, part of the problem is that so much of Israeli society at the moment is not in disagreement with what these radical, far-right, quasi-fascist leaders in Israel are doing and what they're saying. Again, I come back to the point that Christians should not be supporting it. The second thing I want to say in regard to the specifically Christian element is that many Christians don't even know that there are Palestinian Christians. They think of it because Netanyahu and other activists and agitators have put it in their mind over the decades that, the Palestinians are somehow some kind of Islamist barbaric society. Netanyahu has called them barbarians. And Christians buy into that. This is a war against the civilized Western values, which Israel is definitely not demonstrating, against a barbaric entity that's dark evil. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. There are intellectuals, there are many enlightened people, many among the Palestinians, and there are Christians among the Palestinians too, as I've just pointed out. I just wanted to add, just for good measure, so that Christians can understand, that in the course of the atrocious war crimes that have been perpetrated in Gaza, almost 100 Christians have been killed. Now, Christians do not support Hamas. They cannot support Hamas because Hamas is a threat to their identity, to who they are, to their faith. I certainly, as a Christian, cannot possibly support Hamas. Who can? So they don't. Yet, the Israeli occupation forces bombed the oldest church, the Orthodox Church in Gaza, St. Porphyrius, killed 80 Christians. For what reason? Just gratuitously. They also struck the Holy Family complex in Gaza City, which is a Roman Catholic retreat or center or complex in Gaza City. They struck it with missiles. Israeli snipers, killed 2 of the parishioners as they were going to the restrooms, just because it can be done, for no other reason. The Holy Father, the Pope, has spoken clearly about that. He has spoken out about that. So we know about that. It's not hidden. They have also attacked and evacuated and harassed and all but destroyed the Al-Ahli hospital, also in Gaza City, which is a smallish hospital totally administered by the Church of England. By the way, John, that's the hospital that we support. I should just say briefly that I'm not only coming to this conversation from the point of view of someone who feels outraged as a Christian and even as a human being, but, you know, with a friend of mine in India, a wonderful, accomplished dancer named Aranyani Bhargav, we started a group called the Indian Dancers for Gaza's Children, and we have 700 people in solidarity, more than 300 of whom are dancers. And as we speak now, they are performing benefit dance performances all over India and in various other countries in the world. And so far together, as a collective, we have raised $6,000 for that Anglican hospital. So, you know, we also believe that it's not enough just to express outrage, but at the same time to try and help, to support, to do what we can. And because of that involvement, we understand much better what is happening there. You know, how children are being blown to pieces, how they are losing arms and legs and multiple amputations, because the unit we support at the Al-Ahli hospital is a children's unit. And look, I don't want to go into the numbers, because anyone who wants to can see how many thousands of children have been killed, how many thousands of women, the majority of casualties and those who have been afflicted otherwise by the war crimes perpetrated in Gaza are women and children. The Christian institutions are not spared because they're Christian. And in the same way, Christians living in the occupied West Bank are not spared from the invader settler atrocities that go on. They come under the same bracket. And so this is why I have to reiterate that I cannot see any rational reason or any spiritual reason or any moral reason why Christians should be supporting Israel at this time. I would even like to appeal to Christians worldwide and to Christian institutions, social justice institutions that exist throughout the many Christian denominations, to do more. I mean, it's not enough to issue a statement, you know, if you even bother, because I haven't actually seen many of those. It's not enough to issue a statement that then gets filed away the next day and everyone forgets about it. There should be an activist opposition going on all the time, and a highlighting of what is going on with the people in the occupied West Bank and, of course, Gaza. You know, the whole history of the humiliations and the atrocities and the dispossession that they've been subjected to.
Well, it's interesting. Let's look at some things which could ensue from this. I think just telling the story, it's the place to start. And I would hope that there's still the opportunity for me to have a conversation with Alice. And let's not underestimate, South Africa does have some influence because of us having represented the case in the International Court of Justice. And we are obviously made ourselves unpopular with some, but it's been a great relief to see that we have at least tried to say there is a rule of law. There's a rule of international law that needs to be understood here, and that it cannot be continually flouted. And to remind people that the same arguments that are being made by Israel today were made by the apartheid government in the 80s. And I know this because I'm busy writing this book. And interestingly, how's this for an interesting parallel? Well, one of the people that I've been interacting with in the course of my research into the book on Molly Blackburn is Benjamin Pogrund, who was in fact with Molly and her sister at Robert Sobukwe's funeral, which was the event which got them seriously hooked into the anti-apartheid struggle in 1978. Now, Benjamin then went and wrote the biography on Robert Sobukwe and knew him well. He now lives in Israel, and until Netanyahu came along, he rejected the parallels between apartheid and Israel's treatment of Palestinians. But a year ago, significantly 2 months before the October the 7th atrocity by Hamas, Benjamin, in an article in The Guardian, confessed that under Netanyahu, that is where Israel is heading. He is seeing the same dynamics at play and getting lots of flack for it as Gideon Levi. It's so important that we have Jewish voices and journalists writing these stories. And they need to be supported as much as we support people like Alice, because it's very difficult to do that, as was the case in the apartheid era. I mean, one of the people I was in touch with, Alan Cowell from the New York Times, and I'm going to send this to him as well. He was kicked out of South Africa in 1987 by P.W. Botha because of his support of Molly Blackburn and people like that. So we're seeing this tragedy of history repeating itself at a much grander scale. But at the same time, there is that message that we can take from our past, that ultimately apartheid was defeated. What are your sources of hope and inspiration? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, you know, as a Christian, one always has hope. Because one knows that beyond the evil, beyond the apparent, what is apparent, there is God. You know, beyond that, there is God moving to bring righteousness into the world somehow. It's a mystery. I mean, I can't pretend, as a Roman Catholic who's done quite a bit of theological reading and so on, and have prayed a lot in my life, and you know, entered and exited all the kinds of doubts and so on that are common to Christians who are serious about their faith. You know, we have to hope that, you know, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We have to hope for that. At the moment, we are in a peculiarly strange darkness. And I'll tell you why again, John, with reference to Tibet. When the atrocities that the Chinese were perpetrating on the Tibetan people came out, the whole world supported Tibet. All the Western governments met with the Dalai Lama, you know, the religious leaders, the Holy Father, all the rest, they all met with the Dalai Lama. There was a huge Christian support for the Tibetan people. I know because I was part of a movement called the Christian Friends of Tibet as well. And I had support for my work from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, from Cardinal Napier, from Bishop Paul Verreyn of the Methodist Church. You know, these were all anti-apartheid activists as well, you know, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is there was a strong support for Tibet from the Christians. Where is that support for the Palestinians? They're going through the same thing, and especially for the Palestinian Christians who are the brothers and sisters of the Christians in the West. How is it that the West could stand up and the Christians in the West could stand up to support the Buddhists in Tibet? Now, let me just make clear that Buddhism is a religion that I greatly admire. I taught Buddhism for 5 years. It's not that I'm saying it's strange that Christians should support the Buddhists. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is, here we have 47,000 Christians in Palestine, and they're getting zero voluble support or visible support from the Christian brothers and sisters in the West. And let me just tack onto that, John, that we mustn't think that this persecution of Christians by the Israeli regime and its apparatus is only confined to land grabs and land theft and the harassment of Christians in the occupied West Bank. It's happening in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem as well. There was recently a statement issued by the Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem that for years the Christians in East Jerusalem have been not prohibited from performing their festivals, but, you know, the way the Israelis do it is they place obstacles. They harass and they stop so that it's never really visible. So there was a statement from the as I say, from the Patriarchate, the Orthodox group, saying, you have to now stop preventing us from being Christians, from carrying out our Christian rituals, our Christian festivals, because, it's illegal to do so, for one thing. And the other thing is, our rights as Christians ought to be respected. So there is a definite clamping down on Christianity. Definite clamping down.
There is one explanation as to why Christians were ready to support the Tibetans and their struggle against China, is because China is a totalitarian, was a Marxist sort of system. And now it's very embarrassing for us to have to say the United States and the allies, the people that are supporting Israel, which claims to be an only democratic state in that area, well, hang on, this is a bit too close to the bone. And be very quick to see the specks in the eyes of others and failure to see this massive log that's obscuring our insight and understanding of what's happening in the world.
Well, look, there are many publications in Israel itself that are dealing today with the problem that actually democracy in Israel, to all intents and purposes, has ceased to exist. We're looking at the kind of government that is, as I repeatedly have said already, quasi-fascist. And Netanyahu is clinging to power by any means possible, and mainly by means of the support of his extreme right coalition that he has formed. But that's on the political side. And we can no longer how can we see a country as a democracy that has two legal systems? One legal system that applies to Jews in Israel, and another legal system that applies to Palestinians. So two different sets of laws. So the sets of laws that apply to Palestinians are military laws. And the sets of laws that apply to Jews in Israel are civil laws. And I have a contact who's a human rights lawyer who actually sent me a whole article that he had written on the disparities between these laws, which are highly discriminatory, against Palestinian people. So even from the point of view of Christians who are in the West largely accustomed to democratic societies and so on, you can no longer view Israel in that light. You can no longer view Israel as a democratic country. Because quite apart from the outrageous government that it has at the moment, there is this apartheid state which has, you can say, a superior and an inferior citizenship. And which actually literally views and treats the Palestinians as not second-class citizens, but as barely existent. Because what they really want with the Palestinians is to get rid of them. They've said as much. Recently one of their ministers said, have made the strong suggestion that other countries should start taking them in. They want to get rid of them. They don't want them there. So this is a terrible situation, and it's a situation that also, as I keep on repeating, involves the Christians in Palestine.
To end off, two things practically. What can people who watch this and who happen to hear this, what can they do for Alice and her family, number one, and secondly, on a more general level, to lobby?
Two things they can do, John. The first is, as I started out by saying at the beginning, was bring what is in the darkness to the light. Make it visible. Bring it to South African media. Bring it to South African newspapers and articles so that people can see what is really happening. Bring it to the attention of Christians in South Africa, to Christian leadership in South Africa. Bring it from the darkness into the light. And then secondly, I don't know to what extent Alice and her family right now are in need of legal support and financial support. But as I said a few minutes ago, we have managed to raise $6,000 for the Al Ali Hospital, and if Alice's family is in need of financial support, then maybe we should start a fund for her as well. So there are very practical ways. I mean, where are our human rights lawyers? Why are they so quiet? I mean, on this particular case, why are they so quiet? You know, why can't they at least do a case study and present that case study for legal inspection and so on, so that it can be analysed and a judgment can be made on it? So many things one can do, John, but you know, it needs the will.
Yeah, well, we know one human rights lawyer that's going to get a call from me when he gets back from his holiday. He's currently on break, because it is something which concerns us all. Well, I really don't need to say much more than what Donovan has said so articulately, other than to say, folk, normally at this stage you say, like this video, share it, subscribe to my channel. And I'm going to say, don't like this video unless you're prepared to share it with somebody who might find it very uncomfortable to hear. And don't subscribe to my channel if you're not prepared to actually grapple with the deeper foundational issues of what it means to be human in our society today. It is a scandal to think that this can be happening in the 21st century, given the history of what we know from our South African past, of how we got out of that dark cave of Plato's cave and did find our way into the light, did find ourselves misunderstood and scapegoated and all the rest. Well, we are in a whole new space. It's not sufficient for us to just shut our minds off, look forward to the rugby by all means on Saturday. I'm going to as well. But it's not for South Africans just to simply boastfully tell the world that we're the World Cup winners and that we are going to beat the All Blacks the second time in 2 matches. It's more important that truth and justice prevail in this matter, and that we get to grips with that which will truly set us free, even though at first it's going to make us miserable. Thank you.
What makes me, or what encouraged me to have this energy to defend my land, this is where I was raised and born, and all my memories, my family memories, it's my home. So, of course, I will have the energy till my last breath to defend this land.